the divine animal.
One of many. Hold on just a second. And excuse me for my lateness.
Not at all. I think we're like 3 days late due to my having to defer our earlier. So we're more than even. How does this day find you, my friend?
A little groggy, but not lacking any optimism. I've only just woken up, to be very honest with you. So, if it shows, but it's okay. I feel like I can be articulate at most times of day. So we're gonna hope for the best.
I'm thinking about articulacy during sleep, and I wonder whether you ever have the experience of like having a poem on the tip of your tongue when you're dreaming, and then you wake up and try to transcribe it. Do you ever have that experience?
So like not in a dream state, but like, you know, maybe in the few moments before I fall asleep sometimes. But I've learned to like set myself up to be writing, like, you know, to have something close to the bed so I can, you know, scribble just before I fall asleep. So yeah, because the ethic of like trying to remember or like deluding myself into thinking like, oh, it'll be in my mind in the morning, doesn't work anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I sometimes have that experience of telling myself, no, it'll be there when I wake up, just so that I can continue sleeping. But it's like, no, you have to do the thing. Like, go do the thing. How's my audio? Sometimes it's been a little funky lately. Is it all right?
There's a I don't even know how to describe it. It sounds like it's generally okay, and then there's like a sound almost like the quacking of a duck, or or like, I don't know, like a squelching. I don't know if it's on my end or yours.
Any better?
So far.
Yeah. Okay.
So far.
All right.
It could be me. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's on my end because I'm running the audio through this webcam that I've got, and it's been giving me as much grief as it's worth. Maybe not quite more grief.
All right. Cool.
Would you like me to walk through the questions that I intend to ask, or would you like to go right into it?
We can go right into it. I'm willing to improvise in that way.
Okay. Welcome to episode 4 of Talking with the Organizers, presented by Antler River Poetry, formerly Poetry London, this week featuring Tree Reading Series with Brandon Wint. Brandon, thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
So Tree Reading Series began back in 1980, and I wonder whether you'd say a few words about the community that has resulted from so long running a series and how you became involved in it.
Yeah. In a way, it's a difficult question to answer because, you know, I was born in 1980. Like, Tree is older than me. So I, in a way, I am a hesitant spokesperson for the community in that sense because Tree has done and said more than I can personally account for. What I can say is that the community as it stands right now is really impressive to me for its like level of dedication to yeah, just to poetry, which I know sounds like maybe an obvious statement, but you know, it seems like for the tree audience, it's not so much about the bells and whistles as it is about like entering a space for the sake of respecting the craft, respecting the sort of spiritual technology that poetry is. So tree people, I don't know if that's like the official title, but you know, the tree people are very attentive to what poetry can offer. So, you know, what's special to me about Tree is that in the course of one event, we offer a workshop, an open mic, and 2 feature readings in the course of like 2.5 hours. And so like you really get to see sort of the full spectrum of poetic participation. And the open mic is, and I don't say this just because I'm the artistic director, like because it really has nothing to do with me, but it's like the most consistently astounding open mic I've ever been a part of. And I think it's because of the sort of long-standing nature of the community. Like, you have certain people who have been coming to Tree open mics since they were teenagers, and now they're in their, mid-50s, and it's like, yeah. And so it has been, I think, instrumental for many people in sort of not only harnessing the craft, but sort of refining the nature of their love for poetry generally. And so it's like that love is very palpable, I think, when you are at a Tree event.
Yeah, I got started in the sort of poetry community in London, or in this area here near the Antler River. As a result of an open mic, really, I was regularly going to those. I wonder, is that how you got involved with Tree as well? Were you like sort of showing up for the open mics, or?
Well, so not all that. This is a humbling interview to do, because Tree is so much bigger than me. So I did like some years ago, offer a workshop, and occasionally step into the Tree open mic situation. But when I was coming up in Ottawa, so like obviously I live in the West Coast now, and I haven't lived in Ottawa since 2014. But when I was coming up in Ottawa, I would say there was maybe an unspoken but somehow more strict divide between spoken word cultures and the culture of whatever we might call page poetry. So by and large, I'm not saying there weren't exceptions, but by and large, there wasn't a lot of urgency for spoken word artists to be going to Tree, and for the Tree community to be at the local spoken word events. Of course, there was like a little bit of crossover, and so I wouldn't say I was strictly in the Tree community before I was called upon to like try to be the artistic director. I was known to some people were known to me, but it wasn't like you were gonna find me at Tree every month doing my thing. But I think some of those lines in the sand have been erased over time, and so there's more cross pollination. I think part of that is the fact that the Poet Laureate program in Ottawa got reignited, I think, I want to say in like 2016 or so. And for some reason, a lot of the Poets Laureate across the country tend to be spoken word artists. And I think that might have had like some effect on I don't know, the perception of what spoken word artists can do in community. And so now, yeah, it feels quite natural for me to be at Tree and vice versa.
So I'm sort of imagining like a Venn diagram of the sort of two communities of spoken word and page poetry. I suppose that there are differences. There are probably more similarities than differences between those two communities. And in the overlap of that diagram, I guess we have a great reading. Like, what is it that makes a great reading? And is there something about a great reading, or maybe a great performance generally, that kind of transcends the divide between apparent disciplines?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that question. Mostly because I haven't thought about it in a while. So thank you for the prompting. I think for me, what is essential is really just the recognition on the part of the poet, and this is mostly like an embodied recognition. Like it's not something you have to say or like psych yourself up to, but it's a recognition of the fact that for the most part, poetry exists to clarify the human condition, so what what I think we're mostly doing when we attend a poetry reading of any sort is asking people to make their humanity clear to us in the moments that they're sharing the poetry. And of course, it doesn't have to be comprehensive. I'm not saying, you know, we have to bear everything. But I think whoever the reader is, on some level has to be, or the reading is benefited by um, the reader's comfort with that manner of connection. You know, so like for me, I'm not saying that I'm, you know, God's gift to poetry readings, but because I enjoy connecting with humans, I get excited about the encounter. Like I think that's like my main strength as a reader. So it's not that like, oh, he's the most polished, or you know, his performances have the most elaborate choreography or stage movements, or you know, his voice. You know, it's just like, oh, he's genuinely happy to be here. And I'm not saying you have to be in the best of moods, but there's something about the capacity and willingness to use the poem as a tool for revelation in that moment that yeah, that creates strength of meaning, or you know, whatever the connective tissue is that makes the listener say, I'm here, I'm present. And the poem doesn't even have to be any good necessarily, but I think that's the reason why, like, we go to any performance. It's like, oh, is the person on stage um going to show me something of themselves? Because like, that's the nature of art. It's like, you know, we're all involved in so many kinds of interactions or conversations that operate on a certain level of honesty or meaning or connection, and sometimes that level is very superficial, you know. And so it's like, oh, is the poet going to elevate or deepen the nature of engagement? Um, and if they do, then the reader or the listener rather, will generally be pleased. And sometimes the poem does most of that work. Like sometimes the poem is well written enough that even if the reader doesn't consider themselves a performer on any level, you know, just hearing those words in that order does something to make the listener say, oh, I've learned something about the nature of being alive. Yeah, but often it's just about like being willing to look your audience in the eye for a few seconds. And I mean that like literally and in like its figurative significance as well. Like, you know, are we looking eye to eye in the course of this reading? And if you are, something is going to happen. You know, there's something in that encounter or confrontation that is exciting, I think.
Really. So I'm thinking about yeah, creating an environment kind of conducive to learning, and also to that sort of step by step, maybe plunging into the depth of meaning that a poem can afford in the context of a reading. I'm also thinking about it in the context of workshops, which, as you'd mentioned, Tree hosts, and which you've hosted too, and I benefited from your hosting. And I wonder whether you'd say a word about what a workshop environment affords a participant that a poem on the page or spoken itself doesn't necessarily give room for.
Hmm. I think generally it just expands the space of curiosity, or maybe both curiosity and reciprocity. Um, and I'm not saying that this is like reflective of the tree workshops particularly, but um, what I love most, or not most, one thing that I am consistently pleasantly surprised by is when you have a poet in a workshop space who might be like newer to the act of writing poetry, or like doesn't profess to know as much about poetry, and like the questions that they bring to the space, like from their sort of optimistic or like whatever a positive adjective is to attach to the word ignorance, like, the sort of blissful ignorance of like, I don't know and I want to find out, is a really generative energy to bring to workshop spaces. So I think sort of reckoning with the ways in which poetry is larger and more mystical and bewildering than all of us. Like none of us can or do fully control poetry's potential or its offerings, and sort of the humility of entering a space and being like, ah, yes, we're going to study the magic today together. um, uh, is quite nice. And I'm not saying that that's like everybody's approach, or that it's always like a magical intuitive process. Sometimes it's very technical, sometimes it's very playful. Poetry, like the entry points to poetry are, of course, various. But that's my favorite thing. And then I think also, um, obviously a poetry reading is expressive of a poet's particular perspective, but I think in a workshop space, um, again, we get the opportunity to like see that perspective, um, yeah, with a different microscope, or with a wider breadth, where it's like, oh, if you're gonna show us mm, how the sausage is made, because like in the act of any pedagogy, in the act of trying to offer or teach anything, um, we get to see the set of assumptions that come along with you. So it's like, I think poetry is this, or poetry is meant to do this, or I am aspiring to this in poetry. And like none of these assumptions are inherent, you know. And so uh in that way, or in that context, you get to see like sort of the suitcase that the poet has packed every time they're trying to write something. It's like, oh, like when I write a poem, I bring with me this assumption and this assumption and this aspiration and this desire, and just being able to see what each poet is bringing to the process of trying to write something. Um, yeah, again, clarifies at least one set of possibilities within poetic work, and that's sometimes exciting or useful. So it's not for me. I've never encountered a poet who like um, knew so much as to change my life in the space of like one workshop, but I've always benefited from like, oh, this is how you approach it. Cool, like that. Like this nugget is useful to me. I'm gonna leave a certain number of these tactics to you, but this one I'm gonna take because I understand it. So yeah, I think that's the thing. I know that might have been a long, unwieldy answer to your wonderful question, but yeah.
Beautiful. I think about inherency and knowledge and the passing of knowledge in the context of land acknowledgements at the beginning of readings, which are essentially ubiquitous now, prefatory land acknowledgements of some kind. And I wonder if you'd say a few words about those and your thinking through those, their significance, their meaning, their value, perhaps as your position as a host or as an organization which hosts, maybe especially or not, given that the series is situated in territory nominally known as the country's capital in Ottawa, if I can put it like that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question. So we have, and at least in my time, so I've only been the artistic director for just over a year. Um, in my time, we've tended not to do them. We haven't had an explicit discussion about why that is. I have a few opinions about the way land acknowledgements are used, but I would say that those opinions are strictly the opinions of Brandon Wynn, and may or may not reflects the opinions of the tree board, or however we want to phrase that. Um, it's not that hmm, I think um, I think in their intention, land acknowledgements are righteous, let's say. Like there's nothing about the occurrence of a land acknowledgement that I dislike or shy away from necessarily. I think at this point, so when I say at this point, what I mean to acknowledge is that um, for for me in artistic spaces, land acknowledgements have been ubiquitous for probably 10 years. Um, I don't know that there's been any sustained cultural shift that has taken place um, associated with land acknowledgements. And I'm not saying that land acknowledgements need to be a catalyst or like a singular catalyst for for social change. But I'm just not seeing enough of the like attendance work or rigor. Um, and that's not like to blame arts organizers or institutions in particular. But just for me personally, um, I would rather not espouse a willingness to make a certain commitment that I'm not willing to follow through on. Um, and so yeah, I've kind of left them out, not because acknowledging the land and acknowledging the colonial history of this place, all places in colonially Canada, um, is not important. It is important, but I guess I wonder about the next steps, and I feel like um, so often in like it's very in this culture, in our culture, on this land, um, it's very common and useful in a way to always be signifying toward a thing, but never like meaningfully engaging with it. So like um, it's one of the ways that cultural movements and political movements end up being stalled is by like everybody sort of adopting the language of signifying or like um, having the thing exist almost solely on the level of the symbolic. And then it's like, okay, we keep invoking the symbol, we keep invoking the symbol. And so as long as people are willing to invoke the symbol or like gesture toward the symbolism of a thing, or yeah, um, then it stands in for for the meaningful work. People are like, aha, I I have expressed the necessary consciousness, and then all right, back to our regularly scheduled program. It's the same thing. It's the same thing where like the fact that like obviously Black Lives Matter to me. Um, I have no disagreement um, with the fundamental like underpinnings of that statement. But like the fact that Black Lives Matter is ubiquitous now, so I could see it on the side of a bus. I could see it in somebody's Twitter bio. I can see it on NBA court. I can see it at a hockey game. It probably means that whatever whatever political potency we had invested in the phrase has become vacuous, because now it's being used as sort of a placeholder. It's like, oh, I got the BLM sticker. Everyone's rocking the sticker. Like it's a shield. And I feel like land acknowledgements, um, because that is to say, like, if these statements, so like in the case of BLM or in land acknowledgements, if these statements still, because like anything with the capacity to change consciousness is like dangerous, like in a necessary way, to the status quo or to certain institutions. And if these things were still dangerous, like if they were still wielding the power that they were originally invested in, like the university of such and such wouldn't be so so quick to make the acknowledgement or to invoke certain symbols. And so I think they've sort of lost steam um, in a way, which is not to say that we need to like abandon um, the project of decolonization, but recently the phrase decolonization is not a metaphor uh, has arisen in like certain timelines, and I like that phrase because it feels to me like we're mostly engaging with the notion of decolonization on a metaphorical in a metaphorical sense, and so people can like wax poetic before a show about how we're committed to and like truly nothing changes. So so I think we need to we just need to change the poetry of land acknowledgements, or have it be a more um, have it be a poetry that is also action based.
Um,
Hot take. I guess I don't know. Don't get me in trouble out here, Kevin. No, it's cool.
you're in trouble with you.
Yeah.
Um, so, um, so as artistic director for the past year, you wouldn't have been in that position uh, when it wasn't online as a result of the pandemic.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so rather than ask you about the transition of the series online, and I really respect and appreciate the extent to which you're deferential to the series and its history and its breadth, and the sort of modest extent to which you can be a spokesman for or spokesperson for this organization and entity that is the series. I wonder if you'd say a few words about what the experience of running the series online has been. Um, the the idea of accessibility inevitably has come up, I think, over the course of the conversations that I've been fortunate to have with organizers um, on the topic of it being online. But I also know that screen time for many, perhaps for most of us to some varying extents, can be laborious and painful. So I wonder if you'd say a few words about your experience of organizing the series online.
Yeah. Yeah. It's had its pros and cons. Um, I guess from my perspective, I have to be more grateful than not about it because I live in Vancouver now, and obviously Tree is based in Ottawa, so um, the whole circumstance of me being artistic director wouldn't be possible without the virtual space. So I have to be more grateful than not uh, for it and about it. Um, what it has done, what it has done, yeah, is in the same way that this conversation is happening across a vast physical space. I've been able to book yeah, poets from all over the world, or from outside of Canada, and that's been really exciting, and I think good for the nature and quality of the readings that we've had in the last little while, or at least the diversity of them. So we've booked poets from all over the U.S. and Australia, and I'm trying to poke around South Africa and Nigeria to see, you know, I mean, time zones are also a limitation, but um, they also open doors, Um, and so yeah, the festival, or rather, the series has become uh, more global, or at least more international, which has been a treat, I think, and has sort of also um, I was gonna say like broaden the scope of the workshops, but I think actually the workshops are broad and beautiful and shimmering no matter who's facilitating. But yeah, so that's been nice. Yeah, I have to do some more thinking about the accessibility piece, because um, accessibility is also a broad thing. Like there are just the capacity to enter a space is not, like, accessibility doesn't stop merely at the ability to access a thing. I don't know if that makes sense. Um, and so yes, it's true that virtual events create accessibility in some ways, but then you know um, I've been mulling over, like, the merits of, like, let's say, auto capturing for subtitles or captions versus like there are varying degrees of efficacy within that technology. And for poetry particularly, it gets a little dicey, because, like, um, auto capturing the nuance and sort of figurative language of poetry is, like, uh, for me, not always possible in a way that, like, preserves the raw poetics um, of what's being presented. And so one thing that I really do enjoy is not 100% of the time, but meaningfully, um, poets have been willing to um, type out their poems, like, they'll have, like, their face on one side of the screen, and then the poem, like, people have access to read the poems at the same time. And I think that has really enriched even, like, my personal experience of these readings, because I like having those two sensory experiences happening at the same time. So I'm hearing the poem and reading it at the same time. Um, so that's something that I've been, um, I guess, low key proud of in the last little while. It's like, oh yeah, that's something to keep. Um, but yeah, I think, when the board first approached me about becoming the artistic director, I was a little bit afraid, because I knew what it felt like to go to Tree and do the open mic, or rather do the workshop, listen to the open mic, and hear the featured readings. And in person, in physical space, it's like a certain kind of experience, and I wasn't sure that we could, like, effectively contain all three things in a virtual space without having the evening sort of feel like it's dragging. But it really doesn't drag. We start we start our shows at 7 Eastern, and they're over by about 9:10, 9:15 sometimes. It's like it's pretty well contained. And so I think that's also an accessibility issue, and, like, yeah, something to think about in the virtual space. But yeah, I would say in most ways, things have been working. Um, our audience numbers have been, like, fairly consistent, and that's mostly a credit to uh, Tree's community. Like, the people who love Tree are willing to show up for it almost in any iteration that Tree presents itself in, which is nice. But also, I guess, hmm, so, like, you lose some of that, or rather, like, the nature of word of mouth changes when everything is virtual. And so, like, the nature of digital or virtual promotion has to be different. So, like, we've been maybe uh, over reliant on Facebook promo, or, like, you really have to get your social media promotion in line, making sure that everything is working in lockstep, because it's all happening on the computer. So there might be, like, um, a little bit of loss of that, like, sort of purely local energy, where it's like, oh, did you hear Tree last time? Are you gonna come back? This sort of thing. But yeah, for me, it's been fun. It's been a learning experience. We have improvements to make. Updating our website and getting our social media marketing, like, on point. But yeah, I'm proud of the quality of the things that we've been able to do in the virtual space, because of um, the different poets that we've been able to reach out to because of platforms like Zoom, you know. So that's what I'll say for now.
Wonderful. With that, Brandon, thank you so much for your time, Artistic Director of Tree Reading Series. This has been episode 4 of Talking with the Organizers. What a gift to speak with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Kevin. Have a great day. Thank you for making the time for this conversation.
My pleasure.